So I'm Marty Haught, and I have a confession to make, and that is that I'm a serial event organizer. So that means, of course, that I can't get enough of organizing events. But I wasn't always this way, and it was in 2005 when I think it all started. This was the problem. That's essentially the view from my backyard. That's Long's Peak from Longmont, Colorado. And I was living in Kansas at the time, and I wanted to move somewhere that was ideal for my lifestyle that I wanted to live and everything else about my life, and especially a great place for my family to grow up. And I decided that this was it. This is a wonderful, wonderful area. If you've ever visited the Boulder area, it's really great. But the problem was when I moved there, I didn't know anyone at all. It's moving from Kansas, and I actually had a remote job, so I didn't have any coworkers at all to get to know out there. So I started networking, going to job user groups, and they were okay. And I met, forgot his name. I got introduced to this conference called No Fluff, Just Stuff. Scott Davis, that's it. I met Scott Davis. And Scott encouraged me to go to this conference, and I'd never been to a conference before at all. And I went. It was pretty interesting. Not quite as cool as Ruby conferences, but one of the cool things was Dave Thomas was speaking there about Ruby, and I went to those. And I'd kind of heard of Ruby before, but I hadn't really dove in. So I did it. And then after that, I was like, this is awesome. I've got to do Ruby. But there was no one meeting and doing Ruby in the area, so I decided to form my own group. I figured somebody out there would want to talk about Ruby, and sure enough, it took off. And then one thing led to another, and then I'm like helping organizing Mountain West in 2007, and then finally I get crazy enough and organize my own conference in Boulder, originally called Mountain RB, but we changed the name to Rocky Mountain Ruby this year. So there's a couple things I want to mention about this journey for me. First of all, in the beginning when I started, I didn't know anything about event organizing. I had no expertise at all. I just dove in and did it, had a passion for this. And the other thing that was kind of sad was I'd been programming for 8 years before I went to my first conference. And I wonder what would it have been like back in 97 if I had gone to user groups or I'd been to a conference like this. Like, my life would be so much better. I've been further along as a programmer if I had, because the things that have happened since I've done these things, it's amazing. So I want to talk about how we're awesome, because we are awesome. The Ruby community is great, but I see some things that we could still do to make it better, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So one of the problems we have is we need a lot more programmers. And though the colleges are turning out programmers and whatnot, I don't think they're doing this job well enough. And I think this is something that the community needs to own and help bring people in. So we need to do this as part of our job as community organizers and people throwing events. The other thing is I don't see a clear track on how people can improve and get better. And this is something that, although we can maybe expect some businesses to do, I think this is better in the hands of the community itself. So the goal of today's talk is I want to raise the bar. I want to raise the bar and get you guys thinking about how you can maybe help out with this and how you can take on some piece of this. I'm going to talk about a number of things today, and hopefully something there will resonate with you, and you'll be able to go back and do something for that. And another point I want to make about this is that anyone can do this. Let's see, Prakash is right here. So this is Prakash. This is a picture of him at a workshop I did last year. And Prakash hadn't been, how many of you went to Prakash's talk, by the way? Okay, no, not nobody. So Prakash, he hasn't been doing Ruby very long, a year and a half. And he didn't know anyone when he came to Colorado. He met with me, met with Chad Fowler, and maybe a few others, and really wanted to get the best way to break into the community, to learn Ruby, to get better. And so he did this. He owned his own progress here. And, not even a year later, he's organizing code retreats and bug mashes in the community. And it's really making a difference. A lot of people are getting a lot out of this. And it's great. And so if Prakash can do this, then surely any of you can do this. All it takes is some passion there and just asking around and getting going. So here's the roadmap for today. I'm going to talk about growing communities because there's some thoughts I want to introduce here that I want you to think about, some questions I want you to ask as you are going about thinking of your event and what you want to do in your community. And then we're going to go over the nuts and bolts of organizing. I'm going to give you a lot of concrete suggestions and ideas that you can use to go back and do an event. And I'm happy to take questions, but I'm going to wait to the end. I have a lot of information, and I've had trouble getting this talk under 40 minutes. So I'm not going to stop while I go. So I'm going to use the analogy of gardens relating to communities because I think this really works well. You can't just force a community to happen. You can't throw money at it. You can't just create events and it's going to go well. There's a cultivation aspect to communities that exists just like in gardens, and I think this is important to relate to, and we're going to talk about some of these things. So the first thing that I think is important is you need to think about your idea. You need to plan your plot. In gardening, you don't just start throwing seeds in the ground. You have to think about where you're going to grow, when you need to start it, how much space does it need, maybe think about how proximity to other plants might play out. And this is all important before you get started at all in deciding how much space you need and all these sort of things. And planning community events is no different. You need to have a goal in mind. You need to be thinking about what are you going to do, where you're trying to get to with your idea. And planning is very important. So that's the first step. The next thing that I want you to think about is being intentional about your ideas. Community will happen regardless of what you do. Sometimes it's accidental community, and that's okay, but oftentimes that can go in a direction that you didn't intend or you won't meet your goal. And so I want to introduce the idea that you need to be intentional about how you're going about doing this. And one of the sort of maybe esoteric ideas that I have about this is called the community template. This is sort of like an energetic blueprint that exists. And so what this means is that as people get involved, like the leaders who are taking initiative, their intentions, their motivations, how they're speaking, the language they're using, how they're relating to other people, and the first round of people that come into a group, they're going to form this template, this sort of vibe about what's going to happen here. And I think it's important that you make sure that you're clear with this, that it's going to drive what happens in sort of an invisible way with your community. And we actually have a really good example of this, and that is Minneswan. Who doesn't know what this means? Is there anyone who doesn't? Okay, so Minneswan's really cool. What it stands for is Matt's is nice, and so we are nice. And I think this is really profound because Matt's intentions with Ruby and with how he interacted with people doing Ruby has sort of led the way in how people interact with him and how people think about Ruby. And also think about when Ruby came over to the English-speaking world, what Dave Thomas was doing and what the initial people that did RubyConf and all that, their intentions with this, I think all play into why Ruby community today is as nice as it is compared to, say, other communities. So I think this is a great example of the template in action. Another person I want to introduce you to, if you are aware, this is Kathy Sierra. And she, unfortunately, is no longer active blogging or speaking or on Twitter and whatnot. But she still has a blog, headrush.typepad.com, and it's worth reading if you haven't read her stuff. And the main idea that I want to borrow from what she's talking about is, are you making people better? So she's big into creating passionate users, to thinking about your service, your product, your book, whatever you're doing, and are you thinking about how you make people better? Are you making them kick ass? Are you helping them in that way with what you're doing? And I think this is important as community organizers because that's really largely what we should be doing, is thinking about how are we improving the people that are coming into our community. So think about her stuff as you're planning out your model. Toastmasters is something that Dr. Nix talked about, and this is really interesting because Toastmasters, it's an educational organization. It's been around about 100 years, and it has a very specific goal. It wants to help people become better communicators and better leaders. And it has a very defined way of going about this. I think we can borrow this model in our own communities, and this is how you become a better programmer. This is the things that we think are important for you to focus on. So I think this is good as you're planning out your stuff to consider what Toastmasters is doing and possibly borrowing some of that. Another area that I also think about, and I've been thinking about recently, is Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And this is a picture of my son. He is doing this interesting exercise with another boy that involves cooperation in terms of moving their feet. And what's cool about scouting, again, it's been around about 100 years, actually just a little over 100 years now. And it's an organization. It's very much about community, but it's also about building skills in a specific way. And so they've been around. They've had this down. I think we could borrow some ideas here. And I haven't had a lot of time lately, mainly because of, Rocky Mountain Ruby. But I intend to borrow some ideas here and work on this over the coming months. But I think this is something you guys can take back and do yourselves. So Joshua had a great talk yesterday on diversity, and I want to mention this really quickly here. I'm not going to go anywhere close to in depth as Josh did, but I think this is important to think about as you are building your event and you're reaching out to the community. That these are some important questions to ask yourself. And the inclusive question, you might think, well, of course I'm inclusive. I don't mind if people of any gender type come to our meeting. It's fine. But I don't think that's far enough in terms of the question. I think you need to really examine, sort of what's the language being used, what's the vibe, what's the intention of people around you. Are you beginner friendly? There's a lot of very important questions that you need to ask to make sure that you're not doing something that's going to be off-putting that you aren't aware of. Also, I think it's really important to reach outside of your circle, and we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. But I think this is important, and it's going to be hard to grow our communities if we're not trying to diversify. This is a really cool initiative that I've seen lately, and this is the whole Kids Ruby initiative, and I think this is important, that we also think about how we're reaching the next generation and people that aren't necessarily even aware of programming or even thinking about programming. And so here's 2 links that you can go to. I know that with Kids Ruby, they could certainly use some help. I know that you can take what they've got now and use it very easily in your own local community. I think that's very important, that local organizers borrow some of these things and do them locally. So Ron, thank you. So I want to talk about planting for your zone really quickly. So in gardening, you can't just put any sort of plant in the ground, any seed, and it'll grow or thrive. You do have to be aware of what zone you're in, your soil conditions, everything about your environment before you can be sure that your plant is going to do well. And I think community planning is no different. So for example, if you're in Wichita, Kansas, you don't have the resources or sort of the pool of people in the area as such as, say, San Francisco or Boulder or New York or something like that. And thus, you have to tailor what events you try to pull off based on the local conditions. So important, I think you should think about that. I also want to talk about tending your garden. So as things go along, you need to check in with your goal, with where you want to take things, and see how are things progressing. I think you would also want to make sure you do like retrospectives, make any corrections you might need to do. You might also see that membership is flagging or people are becoming uninterested. So it's important you keep talking with the people in your community to make sure that your event is still makes sense to them and they're interested in it. So weeds. This is an unfortunate thing. People are messy. Communities can get messy, and there may be things that come up that you don't like, as in like weeds are in gardens. And one of them is bullying. And I don't see this a lot, but it does exist, and it certainly can pop up in your community. The other aspect of this is unwanted behavior. And this behavior could not be, intentionally damaging, but they might not be aware that the things that people in your community are doing are off-putting or are offensive. And the two suggestions I'd have here is, one, I think you need to be clear about what's acceptable, what behavior and interactions you desire and you want in your community, and what do you not want. It didn't have to be like a formal draft or anything, but I think you need to talk about this and maybe even write something down so people are aware of it. Because if they're not aware of it, they may not know that, I didn't realize we didn't talk that way here, or we didn't do that sort of thing around here. Okay. The other thing is, if you do find bullying or this unwanted behavior, you do have to directly deal with it. You have to basically go forward and say, this isn't cool. I mean, this is not how we behave here. And you don't have to be a jerk about it and burn bridges or anything, but you do need to say, look, this is why this is not cool. This is why we can't do that. Yes, Ryan?
I just think it's important to say that there's many types of unwanted behavior. We've had, in a very literal sense, we've had crazies show up that we've had to ask to not come back to meetings because
Sure.
their behavior was disruptive.
Sure.
And we've also had skeevy business people show up that
Sure.
are just doing their thing. It's totally normal for them, but it just doesn't fit our culture. So we ask them not to come back.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So Ryan mentioned that they've had some people that are crazy, or maybe they're trying to sell something in terms of their business, come to their community and do this. And I think that's important. It's all important to think about what are you trying to do with your event and be clear about that, and then deal with something that's not cool, whether it's really nasty or not. So the next piece I want to mention is spreading the load. It's great if you see someone like myself in your community that's really doing a lot of events and doing a lot of great things, but it can't last forever. I won't run Boulder Ruby and run Rocky Mountain Ruby forever, and it's important to bring other people in. And I think this is a good idea to do early on, and make sure people agree with your vision and they're helping you work towards that. Some questions to ask is, what happens when you go on vacation, or if you're too busy with a deadline or something at work. These things can disrupt your events, especially if they're ongoing, and you should have some sort of contingency plan for this. So that concludes the community planning portion. At this point, you're probably got some ideas going. We're going to talk about nuts and bolts now, and I want you to first take your idea, and so you'll want to start to plan it out, figure out all the things that we talked about there, and figure out what would you likely want to do. So once you have your idea and you're ready to move forward, the first thing I recommend you do is you network. Now, you've probably already done this to some degree, but you really need to know your community really well. You need to communicate your idea to all the people that are out there to see if it resonates with people, if other people are interested in that sort of event or whatnot. One of the great things about that is if you might discover that some guy already has that event going on this other night over here that you weren't aware of. And so it's very important to do these things so that you don't duplicate effort. The other thing that is really important, I think, is seeking advice from other community leaders. There are people there, they may not be in technology, they've been doing this, they know the community really well. They're going to have things they can help you with, especially if you're brand new to this. This can be invaluable. And even if they're do business networking or something, it's totally, there's a lot of things that will translate there that you can use for your event. And finally, ask for help. The worst thing that happen is people will say no, or they might say yes, and then they don't help you. But a lot of times they will say, sure, I'm willing to help a little bit, or I know someone else who might be interested in your idea. It can be someone who can help you. So definitely ask for help. It's worth the effort. Next, you want to gather your core group. And this is the people that will come to your event that are really interested in it. They don't have to be volunteers, although they might be volunteering. I've heard the number 10 to 20 being thrown around as a great starting point, but it really depends on what you're trying to do. For example, you might be doing a code retreat, and you might decide that 5 is enough, a facilitator and 2 pairs. And that might be good enough for you to hold your event. So I think the magic number is the minimum number that you're still willing to hold the event, and you won't cancel it. So you want to find this group out. Locating your space. How late do I go to? Okay, so I'm 20 minutes into it. Okay. Locating your space. So this is important. I find that if groups that don't have a good space figured out and arranged, it becomes a thorn in their side. And there's a lot of interesting places you can go to. I think the best place is co-working spaces. These spaces are already set up for most of the things that you need. They're already doing it, and they're happy to have you come and use their space. Also, Ruby-friendly tech companies that might have a larger conference room or open space in their office, they're usually great. Both of these places usually are free, and they're nice because you can typically use them on an ongoing basis. And I think that's important, especially if you're doing a reoccurring event, that you find a space that you don't have to manually schedule every meeting, because that can get really tedious after a while. If you're doing something a little bit larger or something that you can't fit in those places, theaters and performance halls are really nice. Universities and colleges also have some great spaces that they'd be willing to let you use. These aren't typically free, but if you're doing a larger event, like maybe a single-day event or something that's maybe like a code retreat that has 30 or so people, that might be where you need to look. Public schools and public libraries are also great. If your event is free, usually they don't mind you using their space. And I put coffee shops and bars on here because sometimes those work well. I don't like those so much, mainly because they can be distracting. And sometimes bars just aren't set up at all to do what you need to do. So you need to finalize your details. And this is maybe a little obvious, but I think that mentally going through what your event's going to be, planning it down to the minute is important, because you'll start to realize all the little things you need to have in order to make your event successful. And definitely make a checklist. You'll want to have all that information so that you don't miss anything as you get close. And some common logistics things that you need to have figured out are down there: projector, power, Wi-Fi, seating, and table space. So web presence. I debated putting this in here because I think all of us know about this. But if you're going to have an event or a group, there should be a web presence for it. You should be able to Google it and find it very easily. You want to use social media. I don't know if you want to use Facebook, but I recommend that at least you have a website, Twitter account, and some sort of mailing list / Google group type place for discussions. So that's bare minimum. So with now's the time to figure out your budget. Hopefully you're free. And I think it's best for at least the smaller events to be free, but they might not be. So you need to figure out what costs you're going to have. And then you might look for sponsors at this point. And sponsors are great for a number of things. They can get money, but they can also just provide food, space, or resources, or possibly speakers or whatnot. So at this point, you'll want to consider your budget and get that figured out. So here are some tips for finding sponsors. This may be really easy in your area, and it may not be easy at all. So here are some suggestions you can go about. Any local Ruby shops or consulting companies usually are pretty good. They're pretty happy to sponsor meetings. The cost of these smaller events are really not a big deal for them. They like to get in front of the local developers. Also, really, the next three are just companies that are interested in marketing to developers, recruiting or whatnot. So those are all good choices to try to go after. And then eventually you can, if you're not having a lot of success, you might try some of the larger consultancies or companies in the Ruby space that are sort of nationally involved. And then maybe Ruby Central. Now, Ruby Central, I haven't I asked Chad about this, and he didn't know what the current policy is. But Ruby Central in the past has been willing to give grants out for local events depending on what you're trying to do. They're very interested in community building. I think there's some change happening right now with it, so I don't know if they're really set up for this, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. So if you're trying to do something interesting in your local community, that's certainly something you can try. If for some reason you can't find a sponsor, don't give up on your event. Just do it on the cheap. So do it for free or whatnot, so you can at least have something going on. So reaching out. This can be easy, and this can be really hard. And what I would say with this is start off with an organic process. So that's the easy things like Twitter, your word of mouth through your core group, using any sort of local user groups you might have, and any sort of prominent figures, have them blog, whatnot, so that people that are at least kind of monitoring these things will be aware of your event. And then I would suggest you branch out after that. And this could be months after your event has happened, or a year into things. But start to really go after, use your sponsors to spread the word. Maybe you do flyers at tech-friendly hangouts or college campuses, meeting with other community leaders. Even local calendars are a good place to try and get the word out to reach more and more people. And I think this is important, especially if you're trying to diversify, that you're going to have to get creative about this and go to places that you might not think about. And so this is tough. This isn't always easy, but it's important that you do this. So I really suggest you ease into it, because community organizing can be a lot of work, and I think it's good that you start small. So start with make sure you don't try to get your gatherings too big, and it probably won't be a problem because they'll start small in the first place. A lot of people like food, but I think it's something you can skip. Most events aren't about the food. I mean, I know a lot of them do have food because it's nice to entice people with food, but that shouldn't be their main motivation for coming out to your event. Try to borrow and use free space or whatnot. Those are important to keep your costs down. And then you might want to delay things like the marketing or sponsors if that's a lot of work and you just want to get something going. I think that's great to just skip that initially. So I call this invite continuously, and this is the point that you never stop reaching out. You're always trying to find new corners of your community and tell them about your event. With local speakers, if you're doing something where like a typical user group where you have content and you're presenting it, you can do the typical thing where you say, hey, we're looking for speakers for next month's meeting or 3 months from now. But I find that you have to be proactive and go directly to people and say, I know you're doing something interesting. Would you please present, or facilitate or something in the future? And be persistent about that, because eventually, hopefully they will. And if you have enough people in your community, then you can plan out content going forward. Also, I like to encourage local tech communities to get involved too. So I'll go to them and say, hey, you guys are players here. I'd like to see you more involved in helping out somehow with the events and building the community. This is an ongoing process. It never really stops. So I want to talk about 3 styles that I see in events. And I think all 3 of these styles are important to have in your community. They don't need to always be in the same event. I mean, I guess you could put all 3 together, but that might be a little weird. But I think these are important to understand them and know what they're good at, and then make sure you're covering their bases. So the first is lecture, and that's what I'm doing right now. It's traditional, upfront, presenting information to people. It's a lot of people like it, and I think it's good, but it's not very interactive, and it doesn't have much of a conversation. And that's okay, but don't do this and solely do this. The next is social. And I really like this component. I think the Ruby community is very good at it. So we have a lot of social activities going on. RubyConf essentially is lecture and social combined. And probably you already know this, but social is very nice because it creates a stronger bond between people in your community. And some very interesting conversations can happen in these settings. And I think that's very important and very healthy for your communities that this exists. So I encourage you to make sure that you have a social component going in with your community, and you can do different things with social. You certainly don't have to do the late night bar drinking thing, because I know that a lot of people like that, but there are plenty of people that don't like it. So consider mixing it up so it's not just about that. We certainly don't want to make our events all about drinking. That's maybe not conducive to our goals of growing the community. And the final piece is interactive, and I see this as I think this is the area we need the most help with. Interactive would be hackfests, code retreats, discussion groups, anything like this. I think this is the area that you're going to need to work on the most in your community. It's also the area where people really solidify their knowledge and get better. So lecture is really good at kind of sparking their interest in something or kind of presenting some initial information, but they're going to need to follow up with that. And interactive is a great way of doing that. So someone who maybe can't or won't go and learn some topic or some library or whatnot on their own, they will do so in an interactive setting where they can pair with somebody and see how it plays out and ask those tough questions that they just can't get from a blog or looking at a screencast. So I want to throw out some other ideas that I want you to do. I was originally going to have more information about event types in here, but I was worried I was going to run over on time and didn't want to waste on that for the really obvious ones. But here's some possible ideas that you can go back in your own communities and try out. Cooperative programming challenges. We have one of our local Ruby shops has a hack fest that involves sort of this competition that's really pretty cool. And I think that this is something that we could see more of, especially where it's cooperative, where it's not necessarily always a competition, but like encouraging people to kind of meet different achievements or whatnot in the programming realm. So I think this is nice. This wouldn't take a lot of work either to do, and I think it's great. Some sort of new programmer outreach. We have this idea of like a Meet Ruby meeting where it's totally expected that the people showing up will not know much about Ruby at all, maybe not even know much about programming, but this sort of meeting or this event would be very friendly to them and they wouldn't be intimidated by coming out to it. I really like charity training workshops. I think it gives back to the community in two ways and helps people get better. And I think that they're not a lot of work to organize, and usually companies that will help kind of put on the training are very happy to do so. And those are free, by the way, and definitely worth doing. We did a meeting mashup not too long ago where we had the Boulder Android user group and the Boulder Ruby user group together, and that was a lot of fun. So I think doing events that do cross-pollination with other technology groups in your area are very neat, and I encourage those. And they can just be social. They don't have to actually have content, but something to look at. Also, volunteering at schools. I'm actually looking at doing this at my daughter's middle school. She's 13, and I'm thinking of going in and doing some programming classes, as it were, with her school. So I think that's something that you could certainly look at doing in your community. So the one thing I want to stress here is that I think you should be creative. This is a card game that I designed and did last year at Mountain RB, and it was interesting. It was sort of a social experiment of getting people to interact with each other that normally wouldn't. And I think that there are lots of ideas you can try out there, and I just encourage you guys to play with that and take some risk and do something new.
Really great.
You like that, Ron?
I liked it very, very much because it was not competitive. It encouraged people to interact with each other and seek out others.
Yep. I was when I put that together, that was my intention. I was thinking about something that everyone could win. There's more paths to winning than just getting the most points, and that you had. I gave everyone worthless decks. Well, not worthless, but they weren't good for your type. So you had to trade. You couldn't get a great deck and be done. So that was the whole point. But I had fun designing that, and I think there's lots of ideas like that you could put out there. But have fun. My goodness, this is a lot of work, and I have a lot of fun myself. But if you're not having fun, you're not going to last very long in doing events. So definitely have fun. And I want to tell you that it's really rewarding. Like I said, in 2005 when I started to get involved in community, I've been kind of asleep at the wheel for many years. And I can tell you since then, I've grown immensely personally as a programmer. I've gotten to know a lot of people, and I like that. It's nice when I hear back from people about how I helped them get better, or how I kind of turned them on to something, or they're really very appreciative of the event that I put on. I get that a lot, and it's really nice. So I mean, it is a lot of work, but it is terribly rewarding, and it's good to go. So here's a takeaway. I think you should get involved. I think you should be intentional about what you want to do and have your goal. Start small and have fun and make it better. Whatever you're doing, try to improve what's going on in your own community. That's it. Thank you.